Corrie, which is a peer-based occupational health clinic in San Francisco. We are currently located in Soma, but we have a long history and presence in the Tenderloin as well. I'm a big fan of Mental Health Association with San Francisco, MHASF. We've been partnering with y'all for a little bit at some of our trans housing sites, but I've had the work you're doing on my radar for my whole career, and I'm always really impressed by the quality of care that comes out of your organization. And it sounds like you've grown a lot, and things maybe don't, for old timers, things maybe don't look like they used to. And I think we're going through those same kind of growing pains at St. James. When I started at St. James, became involved with them 18 years ago when I was in my early 20s and had just moved to San Francisco, and volunteered there a long time, and then was just thrilled to join as a staff person and then director. So I titled this presentation Advocacy and Empowerment, Nothing About Us Without Us. And it sounds like we have a lot of advocacy specialists in the room. I can't see everyone now, which I don't love about these presentations, but maybe in the chat, you could type in if advocacy is already a big part of what you're doing. Give me a sense of who is here and how to tailor this in the way that will be best useful. My pronouns are they, them, and as a therapist, I'm really passionate about demystifying and destigmatizing mental health care. I don't see myself as the expert in the room. I believe that each of us have all of the healing potential we need inside of us already. And my job as a therapist is to just bring kind of a roadmap of how we can explore that, dig that out for folks, and let them really lead the way in defining what recovery means to them and how to get there. Obviously I'm not a peer. I have years and years of education, a lot of educational privilege to be here. And yeah, I came to mental health because of my own journey through my mental health recovery. So I had a severe and chronic mental illness for 15 or 20 years of my life, was in and out of hospital. Really never imagined that I would get better or even make it into my 30s. And here I am today. So I've walked that path of recovery and feel really honored when I get to walk alongside and accompany other people through it. I have a private practice as well as my work at St. James. And in both places, I specialize in serving queer people, people who are trans and gender nonconforming, sex workers, activists, and people that live on the margins of society is really who I feel aligned with as a person and who I want to be around, both at work and in my personal life. I'm also white and able-bodied, and although I'm non-binary, I walk with so much cis privilege to the world that I don't tend to claim trans identity as part of my experience, because I think the way that I move, and this is not true for all non-binary people, but the way I move through the world is really different than people who are choosing to walk a different kind of path with their gender exploration or gender transition. I'm going to check on the chat a little bit and see if there's a way to put it over here. Okay. Oh, it's great. Thanks for chiming in, everybody. It's great to hear from you. So Peter asked me to come today to talk about advocacy and also about St. James Infirmary and what we offer there so that our organizations can get to know each other a little bit better, and how you can refer the folks you're working to St. James so that they can access our care as well. Also, just increasing knowledge overall of mental health wellness in the transgender community. And I'm also probably going to talk about a broader spectrum of queer folks and sex workers, and a deeper understanding of what advocacy means to you and how you might strengthen your advocacy skills. Is there anything else that people are really hoping to get out of the presentation today? I'll keep an eye on the chat, or you're also always welcome to interrupt me. I much prefer an engaged kind of model of communicating. It generally feels strange to me to just sit and lecture to people, but that's sort of how Zoom seems like it works in our communities. But please interrupt me if you'd like to. I see in the chat, learning more about my experience as a provider and balancing peer and medical model perspectives. I think that's a great question. Yeah, let's talk about that. All right, let me give you a little bit of introduction to St. James Infirmary. This might be very familiar territory for those of you who are already working at some of our sites. So we consider ourselves a peer-based clinic. Personally, in my understanding of peer work, which I think MHASF really exemplifies, I don't know if we fit that category. It's true that we primarily hire people based on their lived experience rather than their education, but it also has meant that we don't necessarily provide the support necessary for peers to be successful. So if I think it's public knowledge right now that St. James is going through a time of transition, and we're struggling at some of our centers. And I think that's because we're not offering enough support, and we really want to focus that in the future. And I think we could probably learn a lot, and maybe there's a way, Peter, for some of your team members to come speak to the leadership at St. James about how to really implement a healthy peer-based model. That said, I think people come to us historically at St. James primarily because they know they're going to get that peer-to-peer experience. We were founded 25 years ago when sex workers and people of trans experience absolutely did not, for the most part, feel safe accessing medical care, and were oftentimes excluded from medical care or didn't have health insurance. And we started as a medical clinic primarily. We were doing street outreach in the Tenderloin and in Soma. And eventually we started to add on more and more services. So we're primarily a clinic serving current and former sex workers. That is our mission statement. And in the last 5 years, there's been such a need to meet the housing crisis in San Francisco, and especially the housing crisis for people of trans and gender nonconforming experience, that the city tapped us based on our success serving sex workers to take on a leadership role in housing trans folks who are experiencing homelessness. And so we've opened a couple, we have a navigation center and a transitional living house now, and we are no longer exclusionary just for current or former sex workers. We have been a longtime advocate for HIV and AIDS services, and really led the way in some of the recovery work that's happened for HIV positive community here in the Bay Area. And forever and ever, on all of our shirts and paraphernalia, this idea of nothing about us without us has felt really important and is a slogan within the sex worker community around the world as well. I see a comment from Danny here to add a broader understanding of mental health peer vocabulary, and I would love that. And a question, would be interested sharing with some of the growing pains and challenges at St. James? Yes, absolutely. Danny, I'm wondering if it makes sense, I'll share my email at the end, and if we could connect, so I can talk more about what you've offered, which is really generous.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. So St. James Infirmary has grown massively. As we're successful in one area, almost all of our funding comes through the city and state and federal government, which is actually really unhealthy for a nonprofit. So when we're thinking about some of the growing pains, that's part of the problem. The city and government money loves to throw you just the bare minimum to get the job done, but not really enough to make your team thrive. And we've relied really heavily on this government money, but it means we don't actually have enough funding to do these grand ideas that we want to do, especially as peers. I think part of what makes us awesome as peers is we can see what we can see the needs, we understand the needs, and we can really see what is needed to meet those needs in a way that sometimes top-down institutions really miss. They have an idea of what they think is needed, but without having lived through some of the experience, sometimes they miss the mark. But I also think it means that we think outside the box and we think creatively in ways that there may not already be pathways to fund. And that's really hard as an organization. Maybe MHASS is familiar with that. A huge part of what we do is run safer access sites and needle exchange and harm reduction sites around the city. We have some in Soma and some in the Tenderloin. And those sites are explicitly welcoming of sex workers, of gender nonconforming folks, trans folks, and women. A lot of the needle exchange sites in the city are well known to feel unsafe for those populations. And so based on who we staff on those sites and just our mission statement, people know us to be a safe place to come to. We serve about 1,000 people a month at those. We also have an overnight van that runs in the Mission District serving Cap Street, where historically there's been outdoor sex workers. There's been so much in the news lately about Cap Street, to the point where when I'm consulting with people and going to conferences in other states and under other countries, I'm getting asked, oh, what's it like to actually live a block away from Cap Street at 16th and Mission? So what's it like to work on Cap Street and live on Cap Street? And, you know, the truth is, as you all probably know, these huge barriers that have just gone up, it's not going to change the work that needs to be done there. So we have a van that gives out supplies, does testing, but mostly just it builds community. You know, people who are cold at night, who might be working and not wearing enough clothes to stay warm, can come sit in the van and get a snack, have some water, chat a little, and then go back out and work. We've long had a flagship medical service program, which was a very low barrier drop-in medical services. And our clinic, our lead physician just had to leave for personal reasons. And so those services right now are temporarily on. We still do a lot of testing services and testing in the community at other various sites, like Ladies' Night on Cap Street. We offer acupuncture and massage. And right now that's primarily, since the pandemic, we've had a little bit of trouble getting that back up and running in person. So that's primarily happening on Thursday nights. And we have a big drop-in group called Latinas Mujeres en Acción for trans Latina sex workers who come, and it's a primarily social group. It's entirely peer-led. We have food, a lot of gossip, and acupuncture. We also always have on Wednesday nights and Thursday nights our drop-in services where we have a food pantry and a clothing closet. So I'm coming as the mental health services director, and I'm actually coming with a huge heartbreak to share that we've just found out this week that we have services at St. James Infirmary. And at the last minute this morning, I was having to retailer this entire talk because I'd really wanted to talk about that and what's leading to that, the ending of this program that I've stewarded for the last 5 years and feel deeply committed to, is not having enough funding and not wanting to work our staff, giving our staff 40-person caseloads like a lot of other public health, mental health clinics have to do in San Francisco. I just wasn't willing to burn out for not enough pay. So again, thinking creatively, trying to do things a little bit different, a little bit more holistically, really centering not just our participants, but centering our staff as well. And in the long term, that wasn't sustainable. We've also focused so much of our efforts recently on our trans housing programs that some of our other programs have atrophied a little bit, like mine. So I come with a really heavy heart and appreciate all this, feeling your sympathy and holding around that. It's been an awesome program where we were able to serve hundreds of sex workers and people of trans experience in the last 8 years. And I really hope that this grant that we've had from the city moves to another organization that can keep supporting this community just as good as we were able to. So our trans housing sites are some of our most exciting projects. We have a 64-bed navigation center that's down in the outer Soma. And that has, there's a few beds reserved for cis women, but it's primarily focused on serving people of transgender and gender nonconforming experience. And then we have a 14 room, 1.5-year transitional living home for people of transgender experience. And that's in the Mission. And it's in a gorgeous, very well appointed Victorian. So the rooms, they're single rooms for people. They can stay 1.5 years, 24 hours in and out privileges, very little supervision. So it's primarily for people who have experienced homelessness and are really ready to take that next step in self-sufficiency. There's not a lot of structural support there. So it means really being able to navigate internal conflict with your roommates, sharing bathrooms, sharing kitchens, but also having your own room in a pretty large room where you can fit a large bed and really a living space. It's a really beautiful spot. And then we also are running a housing subsidy program, and we run that with a few other agencies in town, where we're paying up to 80% of people's rent for up to 2 years. Our housing subsidy program is on a wait list. Obviously, there's a huge need for that. And I can share some links at the end about how to get in touch with any of these programs. If you want to refer folks that you're working with there. And I know there's some people at MHASF who are already working at the Navigation Center and at the Bobby Jean Baker House. And if any of those are here and want to shout out, if you're open to questions, or if there's anybody that is interested in partnering in those places, I think there's a lot of opportunities and a lot of need right now. Any questions about St. James? Yay, Adrian. I didn't know that you were here. Hi, Adrian. Adrian has been a total angel for us at the Bobby Jean Baker House. I'm so glad to have you. And Adrian, are you open to people's questions about what it's like to be a part of some of these sites?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So get in touch with Adrian. Oh, and Pooja, you're working with Leah. Yeah, Leah is wonderful. So we're doing some awesome work, and I'll be honest, I think if you've been working at St. James in any capacity, you're probably aware that our staff are overwhelmed right now, and these growing pains are hard. We've gone through a lot of leadership transitions and instability, and I think the devastating part of that is the stress falls on the people who are already facing the most vicarious trauma, the most stress at work. Because when our frontline workers or our folks who are offering direct services, they're taking on the burdens and experiences of the people we're serving. When you're getting into relationship with someone as a peer provider or as a direct service provider, there's no way not to absorb some of that. That's what we talk about when we talk about vicarious trauma. And in my belief, a really healthy organization has strong leadership that then's able to basically stand at the back of that workforce to absorb some of that vicarious trauma. And I think that's what we're missing right now to make St. James more sustainable. So given that I'm going to kind of switch gears here, given that it's Pride Month and I am a deeply queer person, I want to talk a little bit about mental health and the LGBTQI community, if that's okay with you, Peter.
That sounds great. Thanks, Corrie.
Yeah. As a, I think about myself as an advocate, and probably the three ways or the three issues that I feel most strongly as an advocate about, although there are many, are probably sex worker rights, LGBTQ rights, and mental health, wellness, and destigmatization. So those are my three hot topics. And so I'm just going to riff a little bit here on my passions, I think. So anyone here that is queer or that's been paying attention, probably this isn't going to come as a surprise, that there's a huge disparity in mental wellness and mental illness community. Suicidality and attempted suicides are so much higher in the transgender population and often underreported. Substance use is higher. Serious mental health issues and serious mental illness is higher. And I think that's primarily because of the level of trauma that LGBTQ people feel inherently in our society, and historical lack of support at all levels. So much more often are people growing up in origin, and that alone is, creates this hotbed for trauma for people. A little bit about the history here in San Francisco. We celebrate Pride at the end of June because of the Stonewall riots in New York in 1969. And 3 years before that, we had the Compton Cafeterias riots. So you can go down to the corner watching that right now, cafeteria. And that's the first place where LGBTQ people were uprising primarily against police violence, which led the LGBTQ rights movement. And that the shoulders of our racial equality movements, of labor rights movements, and of youth movements in the early 60s. The Tenderloin is now the Transgender Historical District. You can see the beautiful flags all over the poles. One of our fiscal sponsees at St. James Infirmary is the Transgender Cultural District, and their founder, Arya Saeed, was a longtime staff member at St. James and programs director at St. James before she started that organization. And I love the work that they're doing in terms of community building. I think that more than any, as a mental health provider and as a person who's recovered from mental illness, I think accessing community and feeling community support is one of the most crucial parts of and highlighting and celebrating that comes out of our cultural district down there. This is a photo of Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, who were the two leaders that emerged out of the 1969 Stonewall riots in New York City. And just like the Compton's Cafeteria riots, these movement leaders and these actions came out of ongoing chronic police violence targeting LGBTQ people, and most often targeting trans women of color. There were a ton of laws making queerness and transness illegal at the time, and the police used that to brutalize these communities. And eventually people started fighting back, and that's why I have the rights that I have today. And as you probably know, we're going through, I think as rights have developed, we're facing a backlash against so many communities in the United States, so many communities that have historically been marginalized. And that is very true right now for people of transgender experience. Since 2020, there's been more record numbers of fatal violence against people of trans experience, although I'm happy to hear that. So I clock these numbers every year in June because I'm often giving a lot of these presentations, and I'm happy to hear that the number seems to be going down in 2022, which is really good news. Unfortunately, The painful news is that the number of anti-LGBTQ bills in our state legislature in the United States has skyrocketed. It's almost doubled since last year. And in the last 6 months, 70 of those bills have passed. Most of them are targeting trans youth right now. And so this fight becomes just as important as I think it has ever been. So I want to do just a little check with folks and see how everyone is doing. I'm curious if anyone has anything to add about your experience or what you're coming across, how these topics might be showing up for you at work. What are you seeing on the ground? And by ground, that can be when we're working with consumers or peers or comrades, but it can also be our coworkers in our leadership. What are you facing or holding people through?
Sorry, I'll just say really briefly. I actually had a trans friend who took their life a couple months ago, and so I'm involved in 12-step recovery, and I thought they were doing pretty well, but I know they had a lifetime of like trauma and abuse and stuff, and so we weren't totally surprised, but it was pretty hard. It's been hard. So
Thank you for sharing, Peter. I'm so sorry. Yeah, that's a big loss. Do you want to call their name into the room? You don't have to.
yeah, their name is Paige Ryan, and they were from like the South, but ended up out here, and I'd known Paige for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years at least. So yeah, it's anyway, I didn't know Paige maybe that well, but I think even people that did were really caught off guard, kind of, because I mean, Paige was a leader in our 12-step community, and so it seemed like things were okay, but I just know there was a lot of pain, and so anyway, thanks, Corrie.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Adrian?
Yeah, I think for me, while it's like absolutely been a blessing to work in a place that's all trans folks, and so like I rarely have to deal with any of the frequent involuntary dysphoria that comes up when in having conversations with cis folks and straight folks. I still have to hold residents and even myself through all of the racism and the anti-Blackness, not just all of it that's going on in the world that's politically affecting trans folks, but also as a Black trans person that's watching in real time all of our progressive work go absolutely backwards. And while also dealing with the anti-Blackness in supposed progressive spaces that continues to come up, that the young person's murder in front of Walgreens really affected me deeply personally. Sometimes I do a lot to not take on my residents' personal history as well, but it's deeply triggering, or not triggering. It's a very profound reminder of how far I've come, but also the things that I still have to face. So it's a lot of, for me, balancing, staying strong so that I can be a type of beacon for the residents, or a model of strength in this adversity, but often is it a very isolating feeling when I'm like just faced with like racial microaggressions that I really can't tackle. I just have to walk through. I just have to just keep going. And so yeah, and then that on top of that is just compounding and compounding to my already like how I have to exist in the world as a Black um, masculine presenting non-binary person who is like, I am not a male and still have to be perceived and take on the aggressions towards Black men too. So it's just there's a lot in this work.
Thank you for calling all of that in. And I can feel the heaviness of all those layers that you're walking with. And like you said, you just have to walk through them. There's not enough time in the day to stop for each one and process it or fight it. So then it's just absorbed. And that's often absorbed into our bodies in ways that we don't realize for a long time. I think the anti-Blackness you're talking about shows up in St. James right now, and it's really hard for that. It's such a have an organization that we do believe in, that we feel such a sense of belonging about, and then still see it happen, even when we know that we trust that most of our colleagues and even the agency's values don't embody that, but it's so deeply rooted in capitalism, in nonprofit culture, that it's here, and it often gets swept under the rug and not talked about. Yeah, it's really valuable to name right now. I work with so many people, so many trans folks, and just feeling people's fear as violence happens in our legislation is really palpable. So what that's actually looking like in people's lives is more nightmares, more anxiety to go to group places, more acute symptoms of complex trauma. So more racing heart, more panic attacks. And what I'm noticing is a lot of people don't always have the insight to recognize that this is happening in me because of this system. So often when we're going through those experiences, we blame ourselves or think there's something wrong with us, when it's really actually a very natural response to a system of violence that's starting to shine its flashlight towards us. Joy, you have your hand up.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be part of this process today. I am very overwhelmed by what's going on. I have a near and dear friend from St. James who we're in touch quite frequently. And when they came over to my place to help me, the people in the lobby all rolled their eyes. I live in a senior building at this time, and it's very, very unfriendly to LGBTQI community because they're all seniors and they're mostly immigrants from Russia and China. And I feel so out of the loop. And when I brought my friend here, the Russian woman in the lobby went, oy vey, and they rolled their eyes and gave us all dirty looks. And it was so like a slap in the face. I came to San Francisco to be openly queer and to put that behind me. And what do I face every day? I'm constantly being harassed when I'm with trans folks. And I'm just so sick of it. I just don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. Adrian it brings tears to my eyes to hear what you have to say, because it's so unfair and it's just not right. And I don't know, where could you go? I thought San Francisco was a place for me to be, and I feel scared being here. I live in a building that I'm being evicted for who I am, and I'm fighting like a dog for 2 years to keep my housing. And you know about it, Corrie, and I'm not going to elaborate, but I just want to thank you for bringing this up because it is a big deal. And, you know, I could be put on the street for exercising my legal rights, and it's not fair. And I'm going to fight to the end. I'm not giving up. And I'm going to also sue my building for elder abuse for what they put me through. This is disgusting and should never happen to anybody in San Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. You gave me a great segue, which I will come back to. I saw somebody else's hand raised, but maybe that went down. We're about halfway through the conversation today, and before I jump off that great segue Joy gave me about the fight, about how we mobilize our own sense of advocacy, I'm just gonna lead us in a little dance party, because what we're talking about lives in the body. And one of the ways that we move through is through physical movement, through shaking. So if you've ever seen a deer in the wild, after it's gotten startled, it quivers, or maybe not in the wild, maybe on Animal Planet. We have a natural, as animals, we have a natural shake response to move trauma through the body. And I think one of the ways that humans have taken that to a beautiful next level is through dance. So give yourself a minute here. Turn off your camera if that makes you feel more comfortable. I'll play a little song. And give yourself just some time to relax here.
One night to be confused, one night to speak the truth. We had a promise made, all hands and been away. Both under influence, we had to stop, lean down.
Things like dancing, like pacing, like shaking, like screaming, all of these are really wonderful responses to the everyday stress of life. It doesn't have to be big, heavy shit. It can be just going to work and putting on that song that makes you feel a type of way on the way home, to release some of what you've absorbed during the day, which any of us working near or in San Francisco are absorbing just by leaving the house, and sometimes in our houses too. All right, I'm going to go back to the presentation and really shift gears here to talk more about advocacy. So it was really hard for me to decide what 3 things I was most passionate about advocating for, because another one is dismantling capitalism and patriarchy. And one of the ways that I do that personally and professionally is try and think creatively with thought partners about ways that we might exist as a society outside these systems of control that are so implicit and complicit around us. And within that, I've worked a lot with Mickey Kashtan and an international group called Nonviolent Global Liberation. And so I draw a lot on the definitions and how they think about power and resources. So for me, advocacy has to do with my definition of power, which is power for me means the capacity to mobilize resources. So as an advocate, I'm thinking, where do I have power? What are the ways, what resources do I have capacity to mobilize? That's looked differently at different points in my life. Right now, I'm in a place where I have had a lot more power than I ever have before. I've been a director at a well-known and established mental health agency in San Francisco. And I have years of a career experience behind me and a lot of training in speaking and facilitation and a lot of education in mental health. These are all pieces of, these are all resources that I have the capacity to mobilize right now. So when I think of the advocacy that I want to do and have the power to do, I'm thinking about how I can put that into action. For me, advocacy right now means the ways that I show up as an advocate are talking about the issues that matter with me in as many settings as I can possibly. It means doing a lot of training. So another part of the work I do is consulting, where I go into huge corporate settings and do DEI trainings on creating more LGBTQ friendly and affirming workplaces. Which means I'm often very busy in June because, places love to be focusing on the queers right now and then ignoring it for the rest of the year. And yet I think that work is really valuable and important and makes a difference. Another way that I've had, that I've been able to do a lot of advocacy work is by tailoring and creating mental health services at St. James that really met the needs of the people we wanted to serve and were affirming, felt safe, felt accessible, and sharing those ideas then with other mental health agencies. So I've also gotten to partner with a lot of the other mental health clinics in San Francisco system of care to sort of share what we're doing and what we think works when we're serving sex workers and people of trans experience. As an advocate, advocacy looked a lot different when I was younger. A lot of my advocacy was through street-based activism. I think there was a big chunk of my life where I realized that I had my own growing that I needed to do in order to be effective and skillful and meet the needs of my community, be a kind and loving person in the world. And so advocacy during that section of my life really looked like self-care most of all. It looked like going to my therapy, attending my skills group, being a part of a recovery community, and focusing on myself so that now I have the resilience and inner strength to be in service of others. So I'm curious, and you can take some notes, or you can drop it in the chat. What are your name top 3 passion issues that you're an advocate about right now? And again, this might be more of a journaling exercise for you. I by nature, I'm fairly greedy. It's hard for me to narrow down a top 3. Although I've found as an advocate, I'm in my 40s now, that my tendency to want it all and to be a part of it all meant that I lost my sense of self and that loss, being able to come back to home base here where that strength and resourcing came from, so that I could really show up. What that ended up looking like a lot was frequently being burned out, to really meet the needs of any of my passion projects, and just spreading myself, just going way too far out there. I love these human rights, environmental justice. Yes, 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 yes. Oh, see, it's so hard for me to choose three. Environmental justice, mental health. Yes. Danny, you want to share?
Sure. I think I have more than three passions, but I want to speak on the one that is most important to me, and it is becoming a well-rounded peer, unapproachable peer, and I think that the only way to do that is through educating myself. I guess broadening my horizons, learning to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. I have a daughter who is part of the LGBTQ plus community, and I'd like to be an example to other parents who were, that may have been some, a topic that was uncomfortable, but it wasn't uncomfortable for me because just like pain, love has no boundaries. It doesn't recognize limitations or different communities. And I mean, it just, love is love. And it helped me to grow. And I come from a dark background, and I'm originally from the Mission District. And I love San Francisco. And growing up, I was raised by a lady who accepted everyone. And I was also raised by a very judgmental father, and he was a gangster type, and I wanted to, even though he had his flaws, he was still, one of my heroes. But I felt myself, even as an adolescent, leaning towards my mother's way of thinking. And I understood the Castro district, and how it was important, and how I knew that it belonged, even though others were didn't have that perspective. And I think it played into when my daughter came out to me. It played into me being able to not see anything but the fact that she was my daughter. And I want to be, like I said, an example to others who are straight and in the mental health field, that it's we have to be well-rounded and be able to handle whatever comes through that door. And if we're not willing to do that, well, then maybe we need to find something else to do.
Yeah, Danny, thank you. Being a well-rounded peer. And just as I'm seeing, everybody drop these things in the chat, and I feel myself get so excited about them. And I'm realizing in this moment that just because I need to narrow my focus to these top passion issues, which are going to change over my lifetime, just what it is now. And then walk alongside people who have the know-how and the passion for their, the things I'm aligned with. So being in community with some of you and the very aligned places, anti-Blackness, homelessness, expanding reach of peer services, substance use, mental health, trans rights, housing, an avenue for BIPOC peers to be viewed as peers. All of these things are right there along where I want to be. And I can see how being in community, that my passion issues don't necessarily need to be exactly the same. I'm actually going to learn more from being around folks who are working on theirs. And that's really how we build. I feel excited about it. Everyday advocacy can look like asking for what you need, talking about what matters to you, speaking up about injustice. It can also look like being a part of specific projects, finding community with shared areas of interest, so that we don't have to feel like we're doing this alone. It can look like things like what we decide to post on social media, what we might write about in a blog. What are some other ideas what are some other ways that you are an advocate that you already are doing in your life? And I think by nature, our jobs are already fairly in the realm of advocacy. So I'm curious to hear what maybe more outside of the box things, just so we can kind of brainstorm ideas about ways people are practicing advocacy. I see Joy added one, attending all the Zoom meetings in person is a way of being an advocate. I like that. That's an interesting question, Peter. Do we disrupt the system or try to fit in? I think those are two paths that we can walk simultaneously. And then there's going to be some of us whose purpose, what we're here to do, is going to be more on the path of disruption. And there's going to be some of us whose purpose is more on the path of fitting in order to enact change within the system. And both of those are really valuable. And sometimes we can do both, sometimes we can't. I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. I think a lot of times we decide which path to walk based on how fast our internal system needs things to change, and how much distress of not fitting in we can tolerate. That's different for each of us. Some of us, because of trauma we've come through, either really do need to feel that sense of belonging and fitting in, or really need to be outside the system. Speaking up even when it's uncomfortable, I think that's a huge piece. We need to deconstruct to reconstruct on what's not working. I like that way that you put that, Jamie. Yeah, you want to speak up?
Hi, this is Jamie. Hi, pleased to meet you and everyone. I want to commend you for your bravery and your courage to foster this journey, even though it's so hard and so needed. I know that there's a lot of our peers who are actually very deprived of this representation because of their intersectionality, because of the mask they have to shield behind, because people don't see them as who they are. So I think our road has so much. We have to take time to really let our true authenticity show and not be defined or deprived by the word that want us to fit in. We are all uniquely ourselves, and we can only shine if we let our inner beauty show. No one should make us feel inferior if we do not. And I believe everyone has the fundamental right to be heard and seen and respected as who they are, right? If something is not working, we need to deconstruct it. And we need to construct it in a way that it would be more equitable rather than equality based. So my point is that I always want to be the voice of the BIPOC, those who actually been silenced, those who actually left out. And if we can find a way to let them have the voice too, then we will build a conversation. We will have a voice. But it all starts with you and me and everyone because it's our community together. It's not about, oh, I'm in San Francisco, I'm in Marin, or I'm actually in, wherever we are. Let us not be silenced in that way because I come from a culture that is very silenced. As a subservient culture, I cannot be seen. I only can be heard as a little girl. So I know firsthand what I'm saying about being silenced. I'm saying all this just because I want to empower ourselves to be able to be brave like yourself, to be on this journey, to know that we can do this together, Corrie. And thank you for all your wisdom and what you share. I'm also like you, I have more than 3 passions. I sincerely hope that we can all work together and build a more livable place for each and every being. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Those are beautiful words. They're the kind of thing that, I don't know, are you a writer? If you were a writer, that's the sort of thing I would read every morning, just to remind me and to feel empowered. You have a gift, I think.
I don't know how to write well because English is not my first language. And I'm trying to remove the barricades of a BIPOC peer with cultural stigma and linguistic challenges like myself because sometimes there is so much of a void, that's needed to connect from the soul. But, I think I have a little voice here and I hope that, with my voice and your voice and everyone else in the room, we can actually echo it. And I just feel that the need to be the difference you want to see in the world. And when the world say you can't, just tell them, watch me. That's how I look at it. So I'm sorry, everyone. I dominated the call and I'll just go quiet now.
Thank you, JB. So I really see advocacy in any form as activism. You can also look more upfront in activist practices, which might be participating in local actions and events about some of these topics that matter to you, learning about current policies, staying informed, and so many other ways that we can practice advocacy as activism. Given that we're in Pride Month and the Pride marches are coming up, I just really imagine us, feeling the support of our ancestors who threw those first cups of coffee and those first bricks. And may I, in my spirit, carry that energy and be strong enough and have enough courage to keep fighting. So then what's one new, after, thinking about this for the last hour, what's a new intention that you want to set in your advocacy practice? And with any goal that we set, I love when it's as small as humanly possible. We want to set intentions. Well, that's not actually true. Sorry, I think I misspoke. I think our intentions can also be our aspirations. And they may not be achievable in this lifetime, but something that you want to call in, whether or not it's something that you feel like you can do tonight or something that you're aiming towards in this lifetime. I think for me, something that I'm really intending towards is learning my area of of advocacy intention is to learn about resource flow and deaccumulation as a path to liberation, which is a little bit outside, the 3 passions that I named, but I feel like that's my overarching aspiration of where I'm headed. I think the hoarding of resources in our society and in capitalism is a huge root cause of our collective oppression. And I feel like that's an area where I can practice in my life to deaccumulate. Peter says, be focused, not try to do everything. Yes, 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 yes. I think advocacy for a lot of us could also look like rest. And if I could inspire everyone around me to rest a little bit more and find space for that, which isn't accessible to all of us right now, I would. Danny's becoming a more effective advocate by taking the cotton out of my ears and stuffing it in my mouth. Oh, truly listening to the struggles and speaking up where your voice can help. Yes. Thank you so much for sharing. These can feel really personal and vulnerable too, and it's totally okay to just keep them on your heart. Anyone that works with me hears me say all the time that you are the most important person on your caseload. I always think of the airplane metaphor about the oxygen mask, that we have to put our oxygen mask on first before we can help the person sitting next to us. And when we're depleted, when we're stretched too thin, when we're not getting enough rest, we can't be in the service the way our hearts desire. How we show up for ourselves truly represents how we're able to show up for others. And you're going to see this most in your close relationships, the people you live with, your family, your partners, your intimate relationships. This is where we get really highlighted to see how depleted we are. And so often those of us in the fight, in the struggle, in peer services are a lot more depleted than we are allowed to show. Getting taking a really hard look at where we need to start putting ourselves first can be one of the most challenging parts of our labor as advocates. Steph added, you're the one asset that you take with you in every part of life and every situation. It's so true. So I'd love to open it up for a little Q&A and also get everyone out of here early. I'm really happy to answer any questions or facilitate more conversation that's burning right now.